So I am Laurie Harbour. I'm president and CEO of Harbour Results. Our company is a small consulting firm located in the Detroit area. We do a lot of work in the die mold space. We do a lot of work in stamping, molding, die casting, doing process improvement with companies, but also doing a tremendous amount of benchmarking activity, looking at the health of companies and suppliers, but also the health of the industries. And so Makino asked me to come today and talk a little bit about electrification, particularly in the automotive industry, and where we see battery electric vehicle and products going. So as part of kind of growing up in Detroit and living in the automotive capital of the world, I know a few things about automotive, and we're certainly studying the battery electric vehicle space. So let's talk a little bit about the automotive industry and where we're going. The challenge right now in the industry is that we're on this sort of charting to 17 million units, right? How do we get there? How do we get there after COVID? And the problem is the supply chain won't let us get there. We were supposed to do 15.5 million units this year, and we're probably going to do about 14. And a lot of that is semiconductor, which I'll show you in a minute, but a lot of that is just supply chain issues in general, labor issues, and now a little bit of softening in the market, right? And so the forecasters are all kind of aligned around 14.2. There are some pressures in the next 4 months of this year that could make that number even lower, like a potential rail strike of some sort that could essentially shut down all the manufacturing here in 4 days, if that occurs. But right now it looks like about 14 million units. But the OEMs are not really concerned about that because they're still making tremendous profit, which I'll show you here in a second. On the production side of things, this is all of North America, so US, Mexico, and Canada. You can see obviously in 2020 from a production standpoint, we dropped dramatically. We thought we'd get up above 15 this year. We're not going to do that. And as we look forward, we probably don't get to 17 million units of production for quite some time. Now, keep in mind, we export vehicles out of this continent and we import vehicles, right? So the 17 million of sales is a mix of import and of build here, and then we export. Like, for example, the BMW plant in Spartanburg exports a lot of those vehicles out of this country and into other regions because it's the only place it's produced. If we look at profit, this is really where the hitch is in this whole issue around how many vehicles we produce. The automotive industry has never seen this kind of situation where durable good demand went up as it did and inventories drained like it did. They're selling every single product they can get their hands on, and they're selling them at the highest trim level possible. So if you were somebody who went in to buy a base level vehicle and they didn't have it, but they had the up trim, you bought it because you needed a car. And so they're selling them, and they've eliminated incentives, and now they're making more money than they've ever made before. So for them, COVID was kind of a good thing. It gave them the funding they needed to invest in all this electrification because they needed money. It's a very big capital investment in their business. So the blue bar is actual dollars of profit. The orange line is what we call profit per vehicle. So this is their factory sales. The average profit they're making on every factory sale that comes out of the plant. The D3, so GM, Ford, and Chrysler have never made this kind of money in the 35 years I've been studying the automotive industry, on average. So what this means is if I sell an Escalade at $100,000, I make 50 on that, give or take. If I sell an Equinox at 30, I probably break even. I probably don't make any money. So that's why the average seems probably a little lower than you might think. But these guys are absolutely printing money. A company like Ford Motor Company brings $50 billion a year in from one product. Does anybody know what that product is? Yeah. So there's no reason to not continue to sell those, right? So at this pace, they're making this money, and we've changed our behavior. We were talking at dinner last night. I mean, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I went into a dealership, and you wanted the one off the lot, right? I'm going to order one, and it's going to take me 6 months to get it, probably in the next couple of weeks. But we do it because we need a car, and we're willing to wait. And now we get to pick out everything we wanted, right? It's like building your own kitchen or something. So the buying behaviors have changed, and the OEMs are loving it, and that's why they're making money. So there's no reason for them to solve all these problems. Now, the inventory issues, if you look at this, and this is what we call days supply. So days supply is the day it gets sold at the factory to the sales arm, it now becomes inventory. Whether it's on a truck, whether it's in a lot, whether it's at a dealer, that's inventory. GM, Ford, and Chrysler used to keep about 100 days of inventory on average. That dropped dramatically when COVID hit because plants shut down. So we drained a little bit of inventory. Then we tried to ramp up and we had supply chain issues, people issues. So we drained inventory further. So this is the average across every OEM that sells in North America at a dealership. We're around 37 days. Some products are at 2 days, like an F-150. Others are at like a car, which people aren't buying today, are at higher days of inventory. But what happened in this process was that we dropped our inventory levels dramatically, stopped putting incentives on vehicles, and we started making money. So now all the OEMs have said, I have no reason to go back to 100 days, because then I have to go back to incentivizing vehicles. So at this stage, they're saying, I'm going to stay in the 40 to 50 day range in order to maintain enough that you can sit in it and drive it and feel like that's what you want, but I'm going to push you to order it. So let's talk about the semiconductor supply chain issues for a second. So obviously semiconductors is the big thing everybody's talking about, but it is not the only thing shutting assembly plants down. When you look at semiconductors, North America has probably lost the most volume along with the Asians in terms of last year and this year. And then the light blue is what we still could lose in the balance of the year if we don't get semiconductors. So what Europe is down because car sales are down, frankly, right? But North America and Asia have been hit the hardest. But what's most interesting to look at is each OEM specifically. And you can see this, if any of you have tried to buy a car lately, you can see some of this behavior. Toyota, General Motors probably hit absolutely the hardest. And General Motors and remember, Stellantis is global now. This isn't Chrysler per se. This is largely Fiat and PSA that are having the issues. Toyota and General Motors the worst. General Motors has made a decision to start selling cars without certain semiconductors. So I don't know if any of you have ever been to a GM dealer lately, but you can get a car, GMC Terrain, and it'll have a heated seat feature, but it won't work. And they'll still sell it to you for the same price, and they'll tell you to come back to the dealer when the chips come in. How many of you think those dealers are ever going to get chips? They got their money. What do they need to send chips to dealers for, right? So I think it's going to bite GM in the you know what eventually, because other brands are not doing that. If you live in Detroit or have flown in Detroit and you look out your window, there is probably 100,000 F-150s all throughout Dearborn, all throughout the airport parking lots. They've rented every lot. They build them because they don't want to shut the plant down. Why? Because they don't want to lose people. So they build them, they store them. When the chips come in, they get 1,000 of them, they pull 1,000 out, they put the chips in, they send them to the dealer. But they won't sell it without the chips. I went to a Stellantis dealer, a Chrysler dealer, Jeep dealer the other day, and I can get a Grand Cherokee in 6 weeks and I'll have every chip in it. So the difference here is volume, right? I can get a BMW, no problem. So the difference is volume. General Motors has 5 million vehicles a year in sales, right? And so does Toyota, 5 to 6 million. So the struggle to get chips around the globe is pretty significant, but it's affecting everyone. The other challenge is other supply chain issues. Again, suppliers are shutting assembly plants down, meaning because they didn't deliver their parts, but all of this is systemically about labor. And because we've really settled the issue where we're getting most of the material we need. The lead times are longer, but we're getting it. The issue is really people and our ability to build product that day when you walk into the plant. Did my 100 people show up? So but we still have issues, right? The docks are still struggling, and as peak and demand goes up and down, then the docks get worse. Logistics that we're having problems coming in from China, that impacts the docks as well. Material cost and availability is still an issue. We have a huge containerization problem. Again, remember, durable goods demand went up 40%. So we didn't have the containers to support it. We have a major trucking problem, significant, no drivers, no trucks. Nobody wants to get parts across the country. And then, of course, we have the labor challenges. But we still have relatively strong demand. I know that people say 14 million in autos, horrible, Laurie. How do you consider that strong? But it is, because we also have all this other demand in other industries. So it's putting pressure on supply chains. And remember, semiconductors, the automotive industry only buys 10% of semiconductors that are made globally, 10%. So they're like the small dog in the big pond, right? appliances actually take more semiconductors than anything else. So as we transition to talk a little bit more about BEV, obviously there's good and bad in this, right? We were headed to battery electric vehicle whether we liked it or not. And at the end of the day, we're still in a challenge of adoption, right? So we partner with AFS, so this is production data in the globe. So when you look at 90 to 100 million units being produced around the globe, the largest portion of them being internal combustion product, by the end of this decade, they're saying a quarter of the population of cars produced will be battery electric product around the globe. If we look at North America specifically, it's actually about almost 30% that is there. Now, the articles you may have read recently say we've sold 5% of our car sales were battery electric product, and that was this big tipping point that a lot of analysts believe was the challenge there. So we are definitely moving towards producing more of these. The challenge, of course, becomes adoption and infrastructure, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But this is what most of the forecasters are looking at as you look at the back half of the decade. So what does that mean in terms of launches? So all of the OEMs that produce vehicles here in North America are included in this data. So BMW and Volvo and all of these companies that produce cars. So this is the number of launches each year, all new, so all new product, or a major, like an enhancement to the vehicle, a major redo. So if you look just in this year alone, we're launching 16 new ICE vehicles, but we're launching 15 new battery electric vehicles across multitudes of companies. And as you go forward, it just continues to grow. So there's a ton of new vehicles entering into this marketplace over the next couple of years. This is just a brief look at what's coming just in the next 18 months. So there's a ton more if I go out to 24 and 25. But GM, as most of you know, if you've read the media, like they're just an onslaught of new electric vehicles and products that are coming down the pike for them. Toyota has a couple. And then you've got these new entrants. Of course, Tesla's got some traction here, but Rivian, Lordstown, Bollinger. Now, will all these happen? I don't know. Maybe not. The chip situation will impact it for sure. A battery electric product has 3 times as many semiconductors in it as an ICE vehicle does. So that will certainly impact some of the launch and some of the product. But a ton of new products and new entrants, new manufacturers into the market. So the other thing that is driving the complexity in the supply chain and in our manufacturing plants is we are becoming an incredibly high mix and low volume market in automotive. How many of you remember the Taurus Sable? I got to look at the older folks in the crowd. Taurus Sable ran in Atlanta, and we made 550,000 of them a year, and we varied the color, and that was it. And people bought the heck out of them, right? We don't have any products like that left anymore, except for an F-150, a GM pickup, a Ram pickup. Nothing is generating that kind of volume off of one specific model vehicle. Now what is happening is we've got, what you're seeing on the left is the count, the number of nameplates we have in the marketplace going out to 2029. You can see the growth of that. And embedded in that is battery electric vehicle. The chart on the right is the cutout of just the BEV portion of what you see on the left. So we still have a lot of ICE product being launched in the market, but we have a lot of new battery electric vehicle product coming into this space. And it continues to grow. And it's creating complexity, but it's also reducing volume. So what this is the average volume per nameplate. So if I take volume and divide it by the number of nameplates we have, if you look at the orange line there, the average volume of a nameplate of an internal combustion is like 100,000. So we only have about 10 products that produce more than 100,000, but we have a lot of, Cadillac sedans that make 20 and the Malibu and things like that bring this number down. I put Tesla on here separately than BEV because they're already up at about an average of 100 to 120,000 on their nameplate. They only have a couple nameplates, so you got to be careful with that. But as you look at the battery electric product coming into the market specifically with a Rivian, a Lucid, those are very low volume products. So if you're a manufacturer, a production supplier, as opposed to a die mold supplier, this is the noise in your plant. Make me 1,000 of these because I'm only going to sell 1,000 and I only need them this year, but I want you to make 10 a month. So it's the noise that's being created in the supply base because of this low volume. The other thing about battery electric product, when I go to the tool spend side of things, how many of you are in die mold? Anybody? Handful of you? So if I go to the tool suppliers, if I launch a, let's pick an F-150 again, if I launch an all-new F-150 that's coming out in 2024, the amount of dollars that I have to go to my boss to get approval for to buy dies and molds is probably around $700 to $800 million that I need to make every new mold and every new die. But that's because I have 14 trim levels and 6 frames and 4 body styles and 6 grills and everything that goes with it. When I launch a Ford Lightning, I have 1 trim level. And it's the highest trim level because it's the only way I can afford it, because I can't even depreciate the tools because I'm only going to sell 100,000 of them, not 900,000 of them. So as you look at an all-new vehicle for a battery electric product, the average spend on dies and molds is about $200 million, in comparison to an ICE product that might be $350 million. The F-150 is kind of the oddity because of all the trim levels. If I pick a normal vehicle, it's about $350 to $400, where a battery electric vehicle is about $200. And if I do a major change or a facelift, it just continues to drop. The only way I can afford to do these is launch a very high trim level. If you look at a Tesla, if any of you own a Tesla or went to look at a Tesla, you can't pick a lot of trim. You could change like the wood grain on your IP and that's about it. Everything else is standard. There's one bumper system, there's one headlight system, all that kind of thing. So there's not a lot of options or choices. That limits what I need to spend on tooling. So there's more and more of that in order to afford these to come out. As we ramp up that curve and sell more of these, and I make more money, then I can add more trim levels. It's the only way I can afford it, especially if I'm a company like GM that has 300 ICE vehicles I got to shift over and get you guys to buy, and also then get you interested in my BEV. So this is what I mean on the trim level. So if you look at the new, look at the current Ford F-150, there are 3 cab variations, there are 3 box sizes, there are 7 trim levels, there's about 6 engine options that you can look at, 2 drivetrains, and tooling is ridiculously expensive. When we launch an F-150, it's thousands of tools into mold and die shops. But as I launched the Lightning, which the current Lightning they just launched is just a spin-off of the current vehicle. So it's not a skateboard or anything like that. They modified the underbody to fit the battery. It only has 1 cab, it has 1 box. It does have 4 trim levels. There's some seat variation, some light variation, 2 battery options, but 1 drivetrain, and the tooling was a lot less to launch that vehicle. If you look at a Tesla, it's very similar. So they're reducing the trim levels in order to get the product out there, and as you get the penetration and profitability, you can grow the actual amount of variation you put into the product. So this is our tool spend forecast. So we look at, we study for the tool and die industry how much is going into the market in terms of vehicle launches and what does that mean. So if you're a tool supplier, you can look at this and kind of anticipate what you might see in terms of new vehicle spend. It then helps you decide what kind of capital you want to buy and stuff like that. So this is an actually very positive outlook from our perspective. All those vehicles I showed you that are launching, they all need tools. I don't care if I'm selling a 10,000 unit BEV or if I'm selling a 900,000 Ford F-150. I need tools to make the car. So for the die mold industry, I'm very bullish about the remainder of the decade. There's a lot of products coming, and that profit chart I showed you is why I know it will continue. So unless those profits drop, we should see a lot of new activity for new vehicles. So this is dies and molds together, the number of launches, and then the spend. The reason that you see 60 launches in 24 in comparison to 2022 where there's 65, but the spend is less, is because in 2024 we have an all-new F-150, an all-new Ram pickup, and an all-new T2XX, which is GM's pickup. All 3 pickups launching, thousands of tools and billions of dollars into the marketplace. Now, if I break it down, this is actually looking at it by OEM group. So D3 being GM, Ford, and Chrysler, Asians, Honda, Toyota, Nissan, Hyundai, Kia, and then the Germans. And then you've got electrics, Lucid, Tesla, Rivian. The electric product for GM and Chrysler are in the blue bar. But that, if you look at 24, that's $7 billion. That That's all GM, Ford, and Chrysler launching these pickup trucks, and that's just a ton of stuff in the market. If you look at the split between die and mold spend, typically mold is about 60% of the vehicle, whereas die is about 40%, give or take, on the vehicles. Because when we do a major refresh, we change mostly just the skin panels of the vehicle. We don't change the underbody, so it's less on the die side. But if you look at the BEV piece of it, this is again, the forecast moving forward. You can see in 23, for example, the quantity of dollars for battery electric vehicle is more than ICE. Next year, all of the OEMs have some kind of battery electric product coming into play, in addition to a lot of these new entrants that are launching. So just a lot of spend on both sides of the equation. And again, for the tool maker, they don't really care how much volume is coming off of it, with the exception of the fact that the low volume guys are coming to tool makers saying, how do you make this tool cheaper? You can make it cheaper, right? Because I only have to run 1,000, and that's just not, not a feasible scenario. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other trends at more of an OEM level, so you can get a sense of what some of these guys are doing differently. This is a slide that we put together because everybody asks me who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. How viable are some of these new companies and how they're being backed? Obviously, if you look at Tesla, they're really very much in the safe zone now, and I don't mean any particular vehicle. I mean them as an OEM. They're making money now on cars. They're not selling credits for EVs anymore. They're really making money on the actual production of their product, and this doesn't have solar or SpaceX or anything in it. There's obviously headwinds and challenges for them, but they are definitely doing well. I frankly think that they will eventually, in the next 5 years, close their California plant. It's just not a good business case to make vehicles in California. The supply base isn't there, the cost isn't there, energy is crazy, and all the new regulations coming out of California just make it impossible to be a manufacturer. Texas was purposeful, and if you look at the high-level view of their plant in Texas, they've got the ability to completely double the facility and just put everything there in a different environment. And they're close to Mexico, they're close to the supply chain, right? If you look at the positive side, we're very positive about Rivian, although they have absolutely tripped and fell in many cases and are still struggling, but they just got a new lifeline last week with $3 billion invested in their company by Mercedes to do this joint truck. So they'll leverage the current designed Rivian and they'll produce it in a plant somewhere in Germany. They may produce it in Charleston as well, where Mercedes makes the Sprinter, but it'll probably take some time. But you have to remember their biggest backer is Amazon. I don't really think Amazon wants a black eye by pulling out of a company like Rivian, so they're not going to let that company suffer. Oshkosh makes the new U.S. postal truck, which is going well. They're sourcing tooling. Oshkosh, of course, makes regular vehicles too, so I don't really view them as a new entrant, but obviously they're making an important electric vehicle. VinFast is a Vietnamese company. They're launching their product in California, and they're building a plant in North Carolina. Arrival is a UK company that's also building a plant in Carolinas. I don't remember if it's North Carolina or South Carolina, but it's the UPS battery electric product. So these companies that are in here, I'm relatively confident about. As we start to move to the left of this chart, this is where I get nervous, right? Nikola is sourcing tooling, and you couldn't give me tooling for them because I can't see a business case where they make it right now. So them, Workhorse, Lordstown. I've been in the Lordstown plant. I was in the Lordstown plant when it was General Motors in the 80s, and it was a bad plant then. It's even worse now. So they're struggling with SEC issues and just they can't get the product off the ground. They can't even design it effectively. And as you move into the middle side of it, these are guys that can go one way or another, right? A Carman, Via is also a Vietnamese company. So Canoe is desperately looking for money to further fund, yet they've got orders for their vehicles. So we just have to watch, and we have to remember that as these products come out, we as consumers are either going to love them or hate them. So when we don't like them, that product's either going to go away or that company goes away. And the most important thing to remember is that these new entrants were before GM, Ford, Chrysler, Honda, Toyota, Nissan, BMW, Audi. When those guys get products out on the road, we have to remember they actually know how to make cars, which was Tesla's biggest issue for 10 years. Didn't know how to actually assemble a car in a way that had quality and on-time delivery and all those things. So some of these in the back half of the decade could wane if we end up supporting our traditional manufacturers. If I had the clearest crystal ball in the world, I'd be rich, but this is just our team's analysis. You have to look at where the product changes, right? So on an ICE product, obviously the biggest impact is on the powertrain side of things, right? So you've got the engine, the transmission, exhaust, everything associated with that. Now we go to this sort of more of a skateboard type of a platform with a battery pack that largely rides as the frame of your vehicle. And there's all kinds of concerns and issues that surround that, but there are dramatically fewer components, something like 1,200 fewer components on a powertrain. Now, there's some things that get added, like a battery tray, and that's a new tool and a new product, but for the most part, you're seeing more subtractive than you are additive when you look at a battery electric product. The interior of the vehicle doesn't change much, right? As you look at the complexity and sort of the cost walk of this, you've got these indirect costs and direct costs associated with it, that if I take a base internal combustion engine, I subtract some of the content associated with it, and then I look towards what I have to add, battery cost has gone down dramatically pre-supply chain issues. Now material cost has gone up dramatically, and I don't frankly know what the impact is right now to that battery, but that battery cost has likely gone up to some degree just because of raw materials. The largest part of a lithium battery being nickel, which is largely made in the Ukraine, right? So that's part of the challenge that we're having today. As we look at some of the electronics that need to be added and some of that scalability, just building a battery electric vehicle is dramatically more costly for a manufacturer. This is why you see the challenges in not being able to launch all the trim levels and things of that nature. It will certainly come down, there's no doubt about it, and as they get better at it, the manufacturing cost will come down. GM is already making their battery electric vehicle products in their assembly plant for less than half of the amount of hours that Tesla takes to make their vehicle. So GM's doing them in about 40 hours a vehicle, and Tesla's upwards of 120 hours a vehicle. That's people. That's where that cost comes, right? So if you start to look at all of the different companies and what they're doing, everyone will ultimately move to some type of a skateboard type of a platform, building this. This is the Volkswagen MEB platform. So in order to commonize this, none of us really care about what's underneath. We'll commonize the battery and the underbody of the vehicle in this fashion, and then flip the top hat, make 14 or 15 different types of vehicles on that so that you can get your styling changes in it, right? So, and ultimately drive down the cost of engineering and development. So this common architecture, as you start to look at forecasts, you'll see what kind of volume we're going to make off of a common architecture like this type of battery skateboard. The F-150 Lightning I talked about earlier was an adaptation of the current F-150. The new Blue Oval program, which is going into the new plant in Memphis, will be an all-new Ford Lightning platform on their new skateboard model. So everybody kind of rushed to the market to get something out, and now they have to redo some of those as well. So this is just a look at some of the things. I won't go line item by line item in these, but this is a look at some of what changes, right? So we lose, if I'm a tool maker, for example, or I make parts and exhaust, obviously I lose the exhaust and some of the fuel system transmission, but I have these additive components. Things like the brakes change, things like your lighting system can change. There's a lot that can be adapted and actually increases some of the content. And so the big thing is when you look at the interior of the vehicle, it just really doesn't change very much, right? I mean, if we were talking autonomous, where a vehicle drives us and we sit in the back and, take a nap or something, that's a very different scenario. We'll change the interior of the vehicle, but right now we're not at that stage. So interiors and things will largely stay the same. But of course the grille changes. I don't need a grille. I don't need it in the same way anyways, right? So if you look at the Hummer, the grille is very different and adaptive into the headlamps from a design feature, but I don't really need a grille because I don't need the airflow through to the powertrain, right? So the other major disruptor is, obviously Tesla's been a disruptor from the beginning on this thing, but this is one of the major impacts that all the OEMs are studying. Is in the last 12 months alone, Tesla has eliminated 1,200 stamped parts in the underbody of the vehicle, and they've replaced it with 3 giga castings. So this whole front end of the vehicle is all one casting. So where your firewall is forward, it's all one casting. The back is all one casting, including the wheel wells, and then there's a cast, frame that holds the batteries together. So there's a lot of pros and cons about this. Obviously, if you get in an accident, you're likely replacing the car because you're going to crack that die cast. You're not. A lot of people think this thing isn't crash worthy. It's passed every single U.S. regulation as well as European and Asian regulations. They now have this in every Model Y that you purchase. They have bought 39 of these giga presses. They're a 6,500-ton die-cast machine made largely in Taiwan and Italy. And this company is going crazy because they can't keep up with the demand. Tesla's got, I think it's 8 in Texas. They put 8 in Berlin. They put 3 in California, and then they're planting in China, and then they're ordering more. So it's critically important because it does not only eliminate the stampings, but it eliminates the dies. So I don't have all that big tool bill, but it eliminates all the weld cells in the body shop. So when you look at their actual body shop, they have been able to dramatically reduce the cost of that shop and what they can do in it. And at the end of the day, as an assembly, as a manufacturer of vehicles, that's where your largest capital is, your body shop equipment and your paint shop equipment. And so that's where you're seeing such a huge impact on, this is on the right, the plant in California, the reduction that they made by putting that in. And they started the Texas plant with this square footage size. So the interesting part about this now is Volvo has purchased 2 of these, then they're putting them in North Carolina in their plant. Mercedes has purchased 3 or 4 of them that they have in Germany. And Ford told us just 2 weeks ago that they've torn apart 20 Model Ys, and they're absolutely adding die-cast people to their engineering capability so that they can figure out how to build a different EV. So I think that although we all resisted Tesla, there's a lot of case studies now that show that a lot of this is moving in the right direction. It's all about capital investment, especially when your volume is that low. So a couple just sort of summary things, and we could talk about some of the questions you might have. I work with a lot of manufacturers who've been in business a long time who still tell me that I'm full of shit, we're never going to drive a battery electric vehicle. That may be, I probably won't. But they're coming whether we like it or not. We don't have a choice. These companies are global companies, and the fuel prices, we all complain about fuel prices here all summer long. The fuel prices in Europe when I was there this year were $12 a gallon. The fuel prices in China are more, and the fuel prices in South America. The fuel prices across my river in Canada are double the price that I pay in Detroit. So they're coming whether we want them or not. The next generation wants these vehicles, and they are the buying power in this country right now. Tesla's model is being watched very closely. As I said, some of them are absolutely looking to adopt the technology. Not all these entrants, these new companies, or these new vehicles will make it. Frankly, GM and Ford will launch some battery electric product we don't like, right? I mean, not a lot of people like the Bolt, and now it's got all kinds of other issues, right? Many of these models that are coming, there's a lot of models coming, so we need new parts and we need new tools. We just have to know how to manage them if I'm a production house making low volume. Battery cost is dropping, but the cost isn't the issue. The problem with adoption right now will be we don't have battery capacity. We don't have nearly enough of it for all those launches that I showed you. So yes, there's plants going in, and there's a lot of new capacity coming, but it's not going to be here necessarily in the time we need it. So capacity is an issue. Infrastructure will be the limitation to adoption. All this stuff you hear about 2035, I know that sounds like it's 13 years away, but 13 years away is like tomorrow in the auto industry because we have 8-year life cycles. So for them to hit 2035 of even 50% of their fleet being battery electric vehicle is pretty challenging. So I may be a little bit of a pessimist about the adoption. It's coming, I just don't think it's going to be, we're not all going to be driving a BEV by 2035. And our challenges that we have in the industry and with recession, these all pose a major threat to our adoption. So So this is our summary of the trends. I just want to talk a couple slides on manufacturing in general. As manufacturers in the industry, as our benchmarking activity, we're collecting 300 to 400 companies of data every quarter. It's not surprising to any of you that the number one concern people have is either labor or cost of doing business, kind of intermixed. Labor, raw material, access to labor, the price of labor, all of those things being huge issues. Things that I would talk to a group like this about 3 years ago, like tariff and trade and LCC countries, not so much of an issue or concern anymore. There's a lot of great things going on in the industry that we have to continue to focus on. There's really good demand. We're absolutely seeing reshoring in the industry, localization of tools and parts all over the place. I'm not saying it's going away and China's going away, but we are definitely seeing improvement. We have low inventories. But as we look to the weaknesses in manufacturing, we still have very inefficient plants. COVID created that to be even worse. We're walking around plants where we just have waste everywhere. It's not just the cleanliness, but it's just bad scrap and high safety ratings, bad quality, cost of quality. So we have to get back to manufacturing 101. We have to understand our data. I spent the morning in the section where all the software was, and certainly yesterday spent it in all of the areas where we're machines. I mean, we have great equipment. We have to use our data, understand our equipment, run it effectively, and use our data to change our business. On the opportunity side, there's a lot of new manufacturing technology that I've witnessed just in the last 24 hours. Things that we can implement, artificial intelligence, predictive maintenance. How do we keep our machines running as much as we need to keep them running? What's our technology roadmap look like for the future? What are we going to look like in 10 years? Software, equipment, process, people. Those are the things we have to think about. And on the threat side of it, obviously, the labor issue is never going to go away. If we think that we're going to get out of this recession and we're going to go back to normal, it's not going to happen. These people are not coming back to the workforce. How many of you have actually lost salary engineered labor people in the last 6 months to the great resignation? Now, I know none of you are raising your hand. I don't buy it. I have 15 people. We lost 4 to money. So, I mean, we are going to continue to lose people to that type of thing. So we've got to continue to focus there. We do think that tariff and trade will change in the course of the next 2 years of this administration. We're not exactly sure what that looks like, but there definitely will be some changes in there. So as we look forward, obviously automation, the future within manufacturing, automation, what does that mean? Unattended machining, allowing the machine to cut the way it is built and designed and engineered, as opposed to making every tool maker touch it, feel it, and sand it down. Designing effectively, really understanding our future equipment and automation, building this technology roadmap. What software do we need? Machine monitoring. How do we tie in our ERP system? How do we do scheduling and allow us to keep equipment running effectively? So this whole issue of artificial intelligence and predictive maintenance. Manufacturing process, just back to the basics, understanding manufacturing 101 again and solving the problems. We're seeing a lot of Band-Aids as you guys have gotten through the chaos, right? You've been living in chaos. I call it the whack-a-mole game, right? So one fire's out, now I got another one, I got to keep whacking them out. But that chaos has created waste. So we have to go back to the basics and be able to implement things. Understand our costs, I talked about that. Standardization of supplies, so we have a supply chain crisis that will likely not go away either because our labor problem's not going away. So we've got to think about how do we standardize our designs, how do we put things on the shelf that we can have on the shelf. Remember, any of you who are finance people, if I can drive throughput in my plant, it trumps the carrying cost of inventory any day of the week. So if I keep an extra month of supplies to make sure that I actually build the tool and don't stop production, then I keep things running and I make more money. Lead time reduction, this is probably the number 1 issue, especially in the tool industry, but the production shops are being told this too, right? General Motors has openly said, I'm going to 50 weeks of product development time. So if they go to 50 weeks, that means I come to you as a tool maker and I said, no, 12 weeks doesn't work for me, Scott. I need it in 9. So those companies who are doing that, speed to market and delivering faster, are getting paid for that. They're not having to hit target prices because they cut out 5 weeks of their build. And lastly, I do unfortunately think we have more consolidation coming in the industry. We lived for the last 2.5 years on PPP money and ERC money and federal funds everywhere. That money's gone. So if companies didn't manage it well, they're in a very different situation right now. We've lost about 4 or 5 tool makers just in the last 6 months in the local area in which I live. And unfortunately, because I have access to financial statements, I could tell you there's a lot of other companies that are on the bubble. So banks are pulling the plug. They're tired. You know, they had to, the administration made them be patient. They're not patient anymore. So there will be consolidation, and that's why all of these things are so critical, because we have to work on the things we control. I don't control material costs. I can't control the administration. I can't control tariff and trade, but I can control labor, and I can control how efficient and productive I am, and how I buy, and how I design, and how I sell, and what margins I'm willing to take. So we have to think about what do we control versus what do they control, and work on those things. So that's it. I want to thank Makino, and I thank you, Kimberly, Makino, Andre, everybody here from Makino. Makino's been a partner of ours for, did we figure this out last night, or did we have too much wine? 8 years, 9 years, long time, and probably the best partner we have. So thank you guys for having me.
Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us. And Laurie, thank you for sharing all that great information. And now we've got an opportunity for some additional questions. And as we showed at the beginning, Laurie, you gave this information at IMTS towards the end of 2022.
Right.
And so over the last few months, I think the audience would be interested to know, how did we end up in 2022, especially in terms of U.S. vehicle sales, and what's it look like for 2023?
So U.S. vehicle sales ended around 13.8 million units at the end of 2023. So frankly, much lower than anticipated. It was actually supposed to be about 15.8 million units. So it just sort of continued to slide throughout the year with lack of semiconductors and other supply chain related issues, as well as, of course, people issues. As we look into the 2023 calendar year, the forecasters are, they all vary a little bit, but we're looking at probably 14.5 to maybe 14.8 million units. We've seen some relief on some of the supply chain issues, and semiconductors is still a problem, but we're selling a lot of high dollar, very highly contented vehicles, and we're putting all those semiconductors into those products. So we do think it will be better, but it's certainly something to watch, because it changed pretty dramatically last year as we went throughout each and every month. But I think we'll be over 14.5 million this year.
Okay, and Laurie, you talked a lot about the inventory, right? The national days of supply. And that was another thing that was a big difference from pre-pandemic. And in recent news, you can see that some of those inventory levels have been increasing. Right. What's your current thoughts on where that's headed? Is it going to creep back up, or do you think they're getting around the number they want to stay at now?
Yeah, we're up now over 72 days, which I think it was 25 when I presented back in October. So you drive around lots and you see cars kind of everywhere. Now, there's still a couple areas where, we're not seeing certain products, or it takes a little longer. But I actually just picked up a new car today that they told me would take 6 months, and it took 2. So we're seeing a lot of pressure coming off of that. I unfortunately, I was really positive that especially the Detroit 3 would maintain lower inventory levels. But we have short memories. And I think that we're going to start to see this continue to creep above where we are today. And people can go pick out a product now, and they need to keep the plants running. And with the challenge of inflation and interest rates and potential slowdown of vehicle sales, although I don't believe it's going to slow down dramatically with inflation and interest rates, which I know sounds contradictory, but the average person that buys a car makes well over six figures, and so they're still buying those cars. But we'll see a little bit of slowdown in that space, and so they want to keep the plants operating. So I do unfortunately think we're going to stay between sort of 70 and 100 days, and some products will probably creep higher than they should.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if some of the pricing pressures are relieved a little bit as a result of that, and consumer maybe can get a little better deal finally this year, but remains
Right.
to be seen.
Right. Probably some incentives coming back a little bit. Again, I had one today on the new car I picked up. So I think you're going to see a little bit more of that coming as well.
You also, Laurie, had mentioned from the battery electric vehicle launches, looking at 24 and 25, there was a little bit of a drop from 2023. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about that and why that is, and if it still looks like that, and even more importantly, what's it look like for 2025 and beyond as you sit today?
Sure. Keep in mind that in the charts that I showed in my presentation deck, our launch data is based on what I call tool source date. So what that means is it's the start of production less 18 months. So we saw quite a bit in 2022. We see quite a bit of tool sourcing on the electric space, particularly within some of the new entrants this year and then into next year. But those vehicles don't launch until 24, 25, 26 in terms of start of production. The slowdown that you see on the electric side, in particular 25 and a little bit more in 26, is those are big ICE truck product years. So General Motors is launching a new T2XX. Ford has a new F-150 and 250, 350, and then the new Ram coming out, and all the derivatives of that, the SUVs and the trim levels and so on and so on. So they are launching a lot of their BEV product for tool sourcing in the next sort of 18 months, and then they're going to turn their focus into these big trucks, because it's what, as I said in the presentation, it's what makes them all the money, right? So they'll focus will be largely on those ICE products and the derivative of those. As you move into the future, I'm still very bullish about the balance of the decade. There will be more ICE product that will turn over in terms of major redos, and then additional new electric vehicle products. And many of those new entrants, the Rivians, the Canoes, and others will start to see more product enter their lineup as well. So it'll be very much a positive outlook moving forward. Now, that said, we're actually in a very difficult time right now. So the industry's pretty slow right now from a mold and die perspective. Some programs were delayed. There is some of that truck stuff for General Motors that is going to be sourced actually earlier than 18 months, but probably not till fourth quarter this year. So the shops are seeing some real headwinds right now in the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, as you talk about what's coming, and the fact that there's still going to be ICE vehicles around for a while, right? So parts suppliers are going to have to find that balance between continuing to make those types of parts as well as positioning themselves to be ready for battery electric vehicle type parts. One of the other things you talked about was the giga casting, and that's something that really has changed some of the industry in terms of what's that look like. Instead of a lot of parts that need to be brought together in assembly, you got these huge castings, and that really can have an impact on some of the suppliers out there. So what would you say is going to be the biggest impact, or who are the types of suppliers that are going to be impacted, and what should they be looking out for? How should they handle that new technology?
Right. The largest impact is to the metal stamping and the die manufacturing world. So that picture I showed in the presentation from Tesla is the elimination of 1,200 metal stamped parts, which means something like 1,200 dies that were produced for that. An underbody is made up of a series of welded stamped parts together. So that's the beyond the powertrain aspect of things that changes pretty dramatically in terms of what you're producing there, no engine, but, other new parts that contain the battery and the motor and things of that nature. The largest impact of this gigacasting is that metal stamping group and die manufacturing. And I think there's a lot of die manufacturers today that are really feeling the pressure because they were already feeling it with the China impact over several years, and now they're feeling that even more. And since IMTS, I'm hearing more and more of the OEMs considering this gigacasting, and in fact, the IDRA company that produces those machines that Tesla purchased has now come out with a 9,900 ton. And there are 2 or 3 other competitors now to IDRA that are also moving into this large tonnage machining because there's such a demand, and obviously IDRA's probably a little capacity constrained.
Okay, I know that there's some companies that are actively thinking about how they prepare for that and other changes that are coming into the automotive parts manufacturing industry. But I know I've talked to some people that they're a little bit paralyzed, right? They don't know what they should do. What would you recommend? What is a way to get started? If you're making parts for programs for ICE vehicles, how should you start preparing if you haven't done anything yet?
Yeah, if you haven't done anything yet, I would say that 2023 is your year. And I joked in the presentation at IMTS that a lot of people probably are still hesitant about buying an electric vehicle, myself included, quite frankly. But it's coming, and it's a long haul to develop a strategy and implement a strategy, because in this particular case, the strategy has to kind of cross, right? So we have to see the decrease of volume and the increase of BEV product. I still believe adoption is further away just by function of infrastructure and the ability to charge and cost and all of those features, especially as we sit here in a recession. However, when you think about the transition and positioning yourself in some of the new players, if you think even just about Ford Motor Company, they've split their ICE product group from their electric vehicle group. So, those people you're dealing with, the engineers, the buyers, they may be different, and they may not buy from you in the same vein for both products because they have different, ideas and strategies and focus, particularly on the volume side. So it's really important to step back, get yourself away from the day-to-day, create create your executive team and put them in a room and really talk about who are our customers today. Go talk to our customers. How well are they transitioning? If I'm a tier 2, is my tier 1 moving in that direction? And then also brainstorm multiple industries, right? It's not just automotive that's going to electrification. We're really seeing it everywhere. So what other, where do I play today? Where do I want to play, or can I play in the future? What happens with my product? Some of it may stay, others may transition. If I'm a stamper, for example, of fuel tanks, but I also make other parts, then, I may lose some and not all. So you really have to get away from the day-to-day, brainstorm, and think about, where do I fit in this puzzle? Maybe do some market analysis of other industries where my product could serve other purposes, but really talk to your customer, talk to your customer's customer. And I say gather as much market intel as you can. There's so many events today about electrification and mobility and networking and interacting with companies that are moving in that direction. There's a lot out there about companies that have taken the leap into electrification and others who haven't. And so you have to sort of align yourself, build a strategy, and be patient in the transition. And at the end of the day, run a good business and not overinvest in areas that have too much risk.
That's great advice, Laurie. And I especially like you pointing out that talk to your customers and their customers, right? They're hearing information, everybody networking together and sharing what they're learning. I think that's really important for people to think about, that they need to be talking and communicating out in the industry to hear what's happening and to put their plan together.
Right.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Remember, up in the chat Q&A section, you can type in a question there. And before we get to the last couple here, Laurie, I want to point out to everybody that if you go to the top right-hand corner, there's a section there called handouts. And Laurie's presentation, there's a deck of slides there. You can download that, go there to download it. You can see Laurie's presentation. So as you were talking about some of the changes, not just in the BEV space, but this is, I see happening all over the place, is that the high mix, low volume atmosphere, production environment, that's becoming more and more prevalent all over the place. You mentioned that in your presentation. How would you recommend people approach that, or what should they be thinking about? How do they most effectively navigate that type of environment?
Sure. That's a great question, because there's actually two sides of the equation, right? It's how are we looking at opportunities? How are we costing and quoting them? Like really knowing our data and our cost numbers so that we can adequately build up a cost structure that makes sense and put the right price on that in terms of not just what the market will bear, but managing your cost internally. And that has to include the buildup operationally, because the second piece of that then is the supply side of that, which is how do I make these parts in my plant that maybe is used to making, 100,000 or more a year, maybe 1 million or more, just depending on what you produce. And so running low volume is not a bad thing, but you really have to be good operationally. And you have to look at things. For example, we implement with a lot of manufacturers what we call swim lanes. And the concept of a swim lane is, if you watch professional swimming, is that we put the fast swimmers in the middle and we put the slow swimmers on the outside. And so as you examine your data, your ability to group your scheduling together to put your fast swimmers all in, a handful of presses, and then take your slow swimmers and dedicate them to one or two lines, and be really good at changeover and really good at maintenance on tools and equipment and things of that nature. So it's important to look at your operations differently, and that will increase some costs, some transactional costs, for lack of a better word. And that has to go into sort of that ABC costing method that we utilize in order to quote products, so that we don't just say, hey, here's the price plus our 10% margin, but let's actually build it up based on what it means to run lower volume. So lots of companies do it and do it very, very well, but you have to be prepared, you have to plan, and you have to do it both operationally and from a quote perspective. And it's not going to change. That is going to continue to be the paradigm shift long term. There will be a handful of vehicles that continue to be high volume, like those trucks. And I guess we don't really know what those trucks look like if we go to battery electric fully. Will those volumes still be the same? But I don't think we're going to shrink that dramatically in volume. So they got to go somewhere.
Okay, well, I want to thank you, Laurie. You've given us a lot to think about, a lot of great insight into this topic. Really appreciate you joining us today. And thank all of you for joining us. If you want to have a conversation with Makino, you can do that. Call your local salesman, or you can also go to webmaster@makino.com. We can schedule a one-on-one session with you. We want to hear about your challenges and what kind of things you need help with, and let you know we're here to help you. So again, thank you, and thanks, Laurie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.